On the night of October 29, 1918, stokers aboard the battleship SMS Thüringen extinguished their boiler fires and refused to die for their admiral's honor. Within 12 days, Kaiser Wilhelm II had fled to Holland, the 500-year Hohenzollern dynasty had collapsed, and the German Empire was no more. The Kiel Mutiny stands as the last naval uprising to topple a major world power, a rebellion that began not with revolutionary ideology but with ordinary men who simply refused to be sacrificed in a pointless gesture of military pride. The German High Seas Fleet of October 1918 represented the most expensive military project in German history: 18 battleships, 5 battlecruisers, 12 light cruisers, and approximately 70 destroyers. Yet this formidable armada had fought only one major engagement in 4 years of war, the Battle of Jutland on May 31 to June 1, 1916. After Jutland, the fleet retreated to port and never emerged again for decisive action. Admiral Reinhard Scheer himself admitted to the Kaiser after Jutland that even a favorable naval battle would not break Britain's strangling blockade. The fleet's purpose had effectively ended. For over 2 years, the most powerful warships Germany possessed sat idle while their crews slowly radicalized. The contrast between officers and enlisted men was stark. Seaman Richard Stumpf, a Catholic tinsmith from Bavaria who kept a detailed diary aboard SMS Helgoland, documented the divide. 2 different worlds were facing each other, separated by a Chinese wall. While officers dined on white tablecloths with access to personal liquor supplies, sailors ate turnips and rations shorted by 2 ounces for weeks at a time. Fritz Betz, also serving on Helgoland, confirmed that the vast majority of naval officers humiliated and abused the sailors and stokers with constant harassment and offensive remarks. The British blockade had devastated Germany. By winter 1917 to 1918, official rations fell to 1,000 calories per day, 1/3 of what a healthy adult male required. The German Board of Public Health would later estimate 763,000 German civilians died from starvation and disease during the war. Female mortality increased 30% compared to pre-war rates. The fleet's sailors, watching their families starve at home while their officers lived in comfort, seethed with resentment. The 1917 unrest aboard the High Seas Fleet cast a long shadow. On August 2, 1917, nearly 600 men, almost the entire crew, walked off SMS Prinzregent Luitpold after canceled privileges. 2 young sailors paid the ultimate price: Albin Kubis, a 25-year-old stoker from Berlin-Pankow, and Max Reichpeach, a 22-year-old Jutland veteran from Charlottenburg. Both were executed by firing squad on September 5, 1917, after legally questionable court-martials. Kubis's final words to his parents became a rallying cry: "I die with a curse on the German militarist state." Anti-war politicians denounced these as marine justice morde, naval judicial murders. The executions did not crush resistance. They created martyrs whose memory would fuel the 1918 uprising. Richard Stumpf, transformed from fanatic patriot to reluctant revolutionary, wrote, "Now I gradually realize why some people fight the military and its system with such determination. Poor Karl Liebknecht, how sorry I feel for you now." On October 22, 1918, with armistice negotiations already underway and Germany's military situation hopeless, Admiral Reinhard Scheer issued the most fateful order of the naval war, in secret, without government knowledge or approval. A subordinate traveled to Wilhelmshaven in person, delivering verbal instructions to Admiral Franz von Hipper. The High Seas Fleet is directed to attack the English fleet as soon as possible. There was no written order. This was deliberate. The civilian government under Chancellor Prince Max von Baden was negotiating peace with President Wilson. The admirals were staging their own coup, what historian Michael Epkinens calls an admiral's rebellion against political authority. Hipper's Operations Order No. 19, promulgated on October 24th, outlined a breathtaking gamble. The tactical plan called for destroyer raids on the Thames estuary and Flanders coast to lure out the British Grand Fleet, 6 U-boat patrol lines positioned as ambushes along expected British approach routes, and a decisive surface engagement in the central North Sea scheduled for October 31, 1918. The disparity was staggering. The German fleet would sail with 18 battleships and 5 battlecruisers against a combined Anglo-American force of 35 battleships and 11 battlecruisers, roughly 2-to-1 odds against the Germans. Had the battle occurred, it would have involved approximately 69 capital ships, dwarfing even Jutland. The admirals knew this was suicide. They intended it. Rear Admiral Adolf von Trotha, Hipper's chief of staff, wrote, "A battle for the honor of the fleet in this war, even if it were a death battle, it would be the foundation for a new German fleet." Scheer proclaimed, "An honorable battle by the fleet, even if it should be a fight to the death, will sow the seed of a new German fleet of the future. There can be no future for a fleet fettered by a dishonorable peace." On October 27th, the very day Scheer approved the final plan, the German government separately agreed to surrender the fleet as an armistice condition. The death voyage had become utterly pointless except as sabotage. The high seas fleet assembled in Schillig Roads off Wilhelmshaven, 22 capital ships ready for their final sortie, slightly greater strength than at Jutland. The order came, sail the following day, but word had spread. Despite security measures, sailors recognized the truth. This was no training exercise. This was the Todesfahrt, the death voyage. After years of rotten food, officer abuse, and watching the war be lost, they were expected to die so their commanders could preserve honor. Evening, October 29th. Unrest erupted across the fleet. On the battle cruisers SMS Derflinger and SMS von der Tann, between 200 and 300 stokers suddenly swarmed over the sides and disappeared into Wilhelmshaven. Shore patrols eventually rounded them up, but the message was clear. On SMS Markgraf, an extraordinary scene unfolded. Crew members gathered on the forecastle and began cheering loudly for peace and for President Wilson, openly invoking the American president on a German warship. The decisive confrontation occurred aboard the Helgoland-class battleship SMS Thüringen. When the order came to weigh anchor, the stokers, the men who controlled the boiler rooms and thus the ship's ability to move, extinguished the boiler fires and refused to work. Without steam, a battleship is helpless. Officers gave the order to sail. It was ignored. They gave it again. Ignored. 5 times the order was given. 5 times it was refused. The ice squadron commander sent boats to Thüringen to evacuate officers who were allowed to leave unharmed. Torpedo boats B-110 and B-112 drew alongside. Submarine U-135 trained its guns on the ship. Around 500 yards off the dreadnoughts, torpedo boats formed what one contemporary account called a ring of death. Their torpedo tubes swung out, ready to sink the battleship on command. For tense hours, ships that had mutinied and those remaining loyal pointed their cannons at each other in the darkness. The threat of German ships destroying German ships hung over Schillig Roads. Faced with destruction, the Thüringen mutineers surrendered. 438 sailors and stokers were arrested and taken off the ship. Positioned directly behind Thüringen, Helgoland's crew watched throughout the night. By early morning on October 30th, they too joined the mutiny. Like Thüringen, stokers turned off boilers and refused orders. Only after torpedo boats arrived and issued explicit destruction threats did Helgoland surrender. Across the fleet, similar scenes played out. On SMS Friedrich der Grosse, firemen extinguished fires. On SMS Kaiserin and SMS Regensburg, mass insubordination. Vice Admiral Hugo Kraft arrested 47 sailors from SMS Markgraf as ringleaders and ordered approximately 1,000 mutineers imprisoned. When informed of the mutiny, Kaiser Wilhelm II stated simply, "I no longer have a navy." Admiral Hipper faced an impossible choice. He could order the destruction of his own fleet or abandon the death voyage. On the morning of October 30th, 1918, Hipper canceled Operation Plan 19. He recognized that, with a mutinous spirit rampant in 2 battleship divisions, an attack on the enemy was doomed to failure. But then the admirals made a catastrophic miscalculation. To disperse the mutinous crews and restore order, they ordered the 3rd Battle Squadron through the Kaiser Wilhelm Canal to Kiel, carrying hundreds of arrested sailors. They were sending the revolution directly to Germany's largest naval base. The ships arrived in Kiel carrying imprisoned comrades. That evening, approximately 250 sailors and stokers gathered at the Union House to organize their release. Police responded by closing the building, driving the sailors into the streets. 2 leaders emerged from the chaos. Karl Artelt, a 27-year-old stoker working in the torpedo boat repair workshop in Kielwick, was a member of the Independent Social Democratic Party who had led a strike during food shortages in June 1916. Lothar Popp, a 31-year-old mobilized shipyard worker, would later reflect, "We were not revolutionaries because we did not fight for a cause, but we wanted to terminate a crazy thing." Their slogan echoed across Kiel, Frieden und Brot, peace and bread, consciously invoking the Bolshevik rallying cry from Russia. With the Union House closed, an even larger outdoor meeting assembled at the Grosser Exerzierplatz, the large drill ground. Artelt addressed the crowd, calling not only for release of prisoners but for universal suffrage for both sexes, the abolition of German militarism, and the overthrow of the ruling classes. The sailors agreed. Tomorrow they would march. The afternoon demonstration drew between 5,000 and 6,000 people, sailors joined by workers for the first time. The crowd surged toward the Waldwiese, a beer hall serving as a temporary naval prison, determined to free their comrades. Their path was blocked by a military patrol commanded by Sublieutenant Steinhäuser. Steinhäuser ordered warning shots fired into the air, then he commanded his men to fire directly into the crowd. 7 demonstrators fell dead. 29 were seriously wounded. Some in the crowd returned fire. Steinhäuser was shot and beaten with rifle butts, though contrary to later reports, he survived. Historian Sebastian Hafner called this the first shot of the revolution, following which the sailors could no longer go back. The killings transformed protest into revolution. By morning, groups of mutineers moved through central Kiel, accompanied by striking workers. At the Wick barracks, sailors refused obedience following a division inspection. There, Karl Artelt organized Germany's first Soldatenrat, Soldiers' Council, modeled on Russian Soviets. More councils formed rapidly throughout Kiel. Admiral Wilhelm Souchon, the governor of the naval station who had arrived only 4 days earlier, requested military reinforcements. 6 infantry companies arrived, but the soldiers showed signs of disintegration. Some joined the revolutionaries, others were sent back. Troops dispatched to suppress the revolt ended up joining it. An eyewitness from the U.S. Naval Institute captured the scene. The town and the harbor streets were filled by a tremendous mob, far more astonished at its achievement than drunk with rebellion. Not a single sailor had remained on duty. They ran off the ships into the town. Thousands, with rifles slung over their shoulders, blocked the railroad station. That evening, representatives of sailors and workers met with Admiral Souchon and 2 government envoys, including Gustav Noske of the SPD, sent to quell the uprising. The sailors presented their famous Kiel 14 points, consciously echoing Wilson, demanding release of all prisoners and political prisoners, complete freedom of speech and press, the launching of the fleet to be prevented under all circumstances, and that officers agreeing with these measures were welcomed while others must quit. By nightfall, 40,000 rebellious sailors, soldiers, and workers controlled Kiel. Morning revealed the transformation complete. Red flags flew over the ships of the Imperial German Navy in Kiel Harbor. On the battleship König, sailors hesitated to lower the German ensign. The ship's captain and a signal officer covered the flag with their bodies. Mutineers on the dock opened fire, killing 1 officer and wounding the other. Then König, too, flew the red flag. An officer aboard SMS von der Tann recorded, "The German war flag, which up to this time was still at the masthead, came down, and it was 5 o'clock that same afternoon when the red flag, the sign of the revolution, went up on SMS von der Tann. We then felt that the war was over." Detachments of revolutionary sailors left Kiel by rail beginning November 4th, carrying the revolution to every major German city. Kiel's radio station broadcast news of the mutiny worldwide. The cascade was unstoppable. November 5th to 6th, Hamburg and Lübeck fall to workers' and soldiers' councils. November 6th, Wilhelmshaven under revolutionary control. November 7th, Hanover, Brunswick, Frankfurt, Stuttgart, Munich, Cologne, King Ludwig III of Bavaria flees. November 9th, Berlin. Revolution reaches the capital. By month's end, all 22 German monarchical rulers had abdicated, most without bloodshed. 5 centuries of Hohenzollern rule evaporated in days. Gustav Noske arrived in Kiel with orders to crush the revolution. Instead, the mutineers enthusiastically elected him chairman of the Soldiers' Council. They saw the SPD politician as one of their own. Noske convinced the angry sailors not to execute their officers, but he could not contain the revolutionary tide. Kaiser Wilhelm II had retreated to army headquarters in Spa, Belgium on October 29th, the very night the mutiny began. He remained stubbornly defiant. When Prussian Interior Minister Bill Drews urged abdication on November 1st, Wilhelm exploded, "What, you as a Prussian officer who have sworn your oath of loyalty to your king, you come before me with such a proposition? I am not even thinking of abdicating. The King of Prussia dare not be unfaithful to Germany." He harbored fantasies of reconquest. "I would rather have my castle shot to pieces than surrender. My machine guns will write in the pavement that I will not tolerate a revolution." At the Hotel Britannique in Spa on the morning of November 9th, General Wilhelm Groener delivered the death blow. A survey of 39 frontline officers showed only one considered a march on Berlin realistic. 23 denied any prospect of success. Groener told Wilhelm directly, "You no longer have an army. The army will return home in perfect order behind its commanders and its generals, but not under the command of your majesty." Historian Siegfried A. Kahler called this the overthrow of the monarchy by the army. At noon, Prince Max von Baden, acting without Wilhelm's consent, announced the Kaiser's abdication via telegraph. At 2 p.m., SPD leader Philipp Scheidemann stepped to a Reichstag window and, acting entirely on his own authority, proclaimed, "The old and rotten the monarchy has collapsed. Long live the German Republic." Friedrich Ebert was furious, pounding the table. "You have no right to proclaim the Republic." But it was done, babe. That afternoon, Wilhelm learned of his deposition, announced before he consented. He phoned his cousin Prince Max and called him a scoundrel. Hindenburg tearfully advised departure. Everyone remembered the fate of Tsar Nicholas II, murdered with his family just months earlier. According to Groener, after a long period of silence, Wilhelm allowed himself to be led like a small child to his court train. On the night of November 9th to 10th, Wilhelm remained in his armed court train at Spa. On November 10th, 1918, he crossed into the neutral Netherlands, traveling by train, then switching to automobiles to evade German revolutionaries. He never returned. Wilhelm wrote to his wife that night, "What a terrible collapse. What a mean and vile undermining of our wonderful army and dear old Prussian state." 2 days after the Kaiser's abdication, at 5 a.m. in Marshal Foch's private railway carriage in the Compiègne forest, Germany signed the armistice. Matthias Erzberger, a civilian, not a military officer, affixed his signature, sparing the generals the humiliation. At 11 a.m., the guns fell silent across the Western Front. The 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the Kiel Mutiny represents the last successful naval uprising to topple a major world power. The social organization of warships, with their rigid class hierarchies, skilled specialists, and forced interdependence, created perfect conditions for revolutionary consciousness. Ships mirrored industrial society in ways armies did not. Yet the German sailors were not Bolsheviks. As Lothar Popp reflected, "We were not revolutionaries. We wanted to terminate a crazy thing." Their 14 points demanded limited reforms, not socialist transformation. They sought peace, bread, and an end to military tyranny, not dictatorship of the proletariat. Historian Wolfram Wett observed, "The Kiel signal did not point in the direction of a council state according to the Bolshevist example. Instead, it stood for the demand for the fastest possible ending of the war, in the direction of a liberal, social, and democratic political system in which especially militarism should no longer have place. The revolution's very success would be twisted against it. The military leadership, by surrendering to civilians and arranging the armistice, escaped responsibility for defeat." The Dolchstoß Legende, stab in the back myth, emerged. The false belief that Germany had not been defeated militarily but betrayed by socialists and Jews. Adolf Hitler would exploit this myth relentlessly, promising to avenge the November criminals. The Weimar Republic, born from sailors' courage, would perish at the hands of those who could never accept how it began. The Kiel Mutiny succeeded because ordinary sailors, stokers, mechanics, gunners refused to participate in their own destruction. They did not set out to overthrow an empire. They simply said no to a pointless death. As convicted sailor Willy Weber stated, "Nobody wanted a revolution. We just wanted to be treated more like human beings." In 6 days, that refusal cascaded into the collapse of a 500-year dynasty, the end of the world's bloodiest war, and the birth of German democracy. The admirals who planned the death voyage to preserve naval honor instead precipitated the revolution they feared. Their contempt for civilian authority and willingness to sacrifice thousands for abstract glory became the very catalyst of their destruction. The plaque at Kiel's Union House reads, "The Kiel Workers and Soldiers Council met in this house at the beginning of November 1918. It gave the decisive impetus for the proclamation of the First German Republic on November 9, 1918 in Berlin. History turned not on the decisions of emperors or generals, but on stokers who extinguished their fires and refused to weigh anchor, men who chose life over honor, and in doing so ended an empire."